Welcome back to the State of Streaming podcast. I'm your host, Tim Rowe, and this week you'll be hearing a replay of my appearance on the First Party Capital podcast. First Party Capital is a really interesting venture capital fund based in the UK. I chat with three of the general partners there, Kevin, Rich, and Kieran, all about their investment thesis, what they see working in streaming TV, what they see working in ad tech, where they believe the puck is going, and ultimately what that means for you. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the FPC podcast. It's been a few weeks since we last got together, but we've got a great guest this week in Tim Rowe, who is from State of Streaming. We recently got to know Tim through his coverage of First Party Capital's corporate innovation model announcement about 2 months ago, which happened to coincide with an interesting product announcement from Trade Desk as well. Tim, great to have you on. In case our listeners are not yet familiar with you, it'd be great if you could just give us a quick intro on your background, and then we can get straight into your perspective on the key subjects of the day around the ad tech ecosystem.
Rich, great to be here. Thanks for having me. State of Streaming is really the superstore for the streaming TV obsessed. So it's dedicated, unique news coverage. Really, we think of ourselves as like the pattern recognition layer on top of the news, which was how FPC hit our radar a few weeks ago. And we are really dedicated to bringing that perspective to market in a way that's community driven. We just launched a Discord. Our core pillar output each month is called the Unified Streaming Power Index, where we stack rank all of the streaming apps against one another based on estimated addressable household reach and some other parameters that matter to buyers. So that's really where we're focused on existing in the space, and excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And it's been, it's obviously been an interesting couple of weeks since we last spoke, particularly with regards to, I guess, the media buying platforms, SSPs and DSPs continuing to converge, some up and down news for the Trade Desk. But I would love to, start with your perspective on where the industry is heading right now. In your original piece, which we can link to in the show notes, you have this quite interesting almost parallel between the more open source modular version of the internet and the more closed environment, vertically integrated Trade Desk style platform. So yeah, would love to just sort of start with that, how you see that evolving.
I think there's just a really clear narrative forming around brands and companies who have access to first party data being the lifeblood of really what they do next. Everything from supply chain planning and forecasting down to how the media is executed. That really is fundamental to, I think, how brands and companies are making decisions. So then that decision begets another decision, which is, how do I want to approach my ad tech infrastructure? Is that something that I want to build, owned, and operated? Is that something that I want to outsource to a partner? Is it something that I need to build a layer on top of? And I don't know that there's a right answer yet, but keeping that first party data really at the center, that is a trend that we're observing.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And Kieran, it's been an exciting week for the FPC portfolio and the FPC family, with Index Exchange and Bedrock announcing the launch of the Index Cloud, and with that, Bedrock being the first containerized DSP, effectively doing all of its sort of buying decisioning within the Index Cloud. So that's been a huge step forward, and hopefully a pretty transformational update for Bedrock, and probably the start of a whole new trend of containerized DSPs living within SSPs. But yeah, Kev, maybe your take on that and how that kind of feeds into the narrative that Tim has opened up earlier on a couple of months ago.
Yeah, that's it. I think great news for Bedrock and the team over there, and congratulations to the Bedrock team and the Index team on what is a really kind of cutting edge partnership, and I'm sure just the beginning of a big transformation really in the business model and integration model across the industry. I think this has been coming for a few years, and the work behind the scenes, has been something that has stretched out over a few iterations, and I think fundamentally it all goes back to the shifting source of value across the industry, right? So the value is not necessarily just standing up a huge infrastructure. It's not really in kind of features and point solutions anymore. Software has lost its moat somewhat because of AI, and certainly the software underpinning a lot of the advertising industry has been standardized. OpenRTB and lots of other different standards have been around for a long time now, and so, albeit it might cost millions and millions of dollars to get to table stakes, there's very little differentiation even at that point when you've invested 5-10 million. So I think the trend of the future is that value has shifted away from just ad tech software towards proprietary first party data or privileged access to second or third party data. It's shifted towards finance because this industry is increasingly, tighter margins, stretched cash flow, access to finance and access to cheaper capital is a real USP, becoming the bank effectively. And then the value's also shifted to being able to deploy not just large scale infrastructure, but infrastructure that's kind of minimizing data leakage, minimizing carbon output, all of these secondary requirements now that the procurement teams in big advertisers, big agencies are looking for. And so what I think has happened recently is software development cycles have accelerated, and there's a new generation of companies now that are able to start from scratch, to build for a cloud native world, for a first party data centric world, for a world where it's not just about cookies, it's about multiple signals, it's about multiple channels, and they're actually probably able to be more aggressive with business models by making the infrastructure cheaper and getting closer to the supply chain. And so, for the first time in a long time, I think all the big incumbents are being challenged. It kind of mirrors what's happening in search with the AI companies challenging Google. On a more micro level, the big incumbent ad tech platforms are probably now facing challenges from the faster moving edge of the industry and all the innovative startups. And kudos to Index as a more established company for recognizing that years ago and moving towards this kind of cloud infrastructure layer for advertising rather than actually just selling, taking a margin on media. They're starting to build out an ecosystem type setup that's hugely aligned with Bedrock. Obviously, Bedrock are picking up where Beeswax and others left off. They're a composable layer to support the independent ecosystem, and the two of them have kind of found an alignment of minds there, and it's a great announcement.
And it seems like one of the areas where the technical capability is most applicable is streaming TV, live TV, big events like sports matches, where you have suddenly hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of concurrent viewers hitting an ad start at the same time. Tim, it's something you touched on in your article, but yeah, we'd love to get your view on how you're seeing the technology around advertising and in sort of the live streaming environment shift, and why the likes of Index and Bedrock are hopefully at the forefront of that.
I think that sports are definitely the key driver. It's the number one ask from advertisers. I've got to be on sports. How can I be on sports? And sort of a misnomer with streaming is that a lot of the sports viewership on streaming is actually on rebroadcast transmissions available via streaming apps. So I think just fundamentally understanding how is the content getting onto the streaming app, that's important for both an advertiser's perspective as a consumer, understanding that, but then from an advertising needs standpoint, what do I need to be able to actually deploy advertising in the fourth quarter of a game, or maybe in extra time, in overtime, when that's inventory that's outside of the core programming of that sporting event. So sports are definitely the driver, I think, of a lot of the ad tech innovation in the space. And especially live sport, it's a gap that streaming advertising has yet to really solve. So I think that Bedrock and this announcement are perfectly positioned to close some of that gap.
Yes, definitely. The live sport is one of those few sort of real premium, large scale environments where I think that viewers are very happy to be and keen to be and want to be there live rather than catching up afterwards. Kieran, one of the other interesting angles that's come out on this sort of topic was from our friend Brian Weezer, Madison and Wall. You shared his article with us internally. Why don't you tell the audience a bit about that? Because I think Brian's point wasn't that it's not just sort of competition between ad tech companies, but actually that the sort of margin potential is compressing with the likes of Index and Bedrock operating in a much more single digit sort of take rate environment. From your conversations with the industry, how are you seeing that shift happening?
Like, margin is the one thing that drives this industry. Money is everything in this industry. So I love the way people in New York who pretend that they're in Silicon Valley don't understand that. The reality is programmatic exists because agencies were getting hammered on margin retention by ad networks or brands were. So working media was like minuscule versus what a specific media who are now Viant DSP were taking. I think like 98% was the record margin take. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but well, they had lots of parties, so I assume they had a lot of money. So if you think about what's happening right now, right, like the spat between publicists and the trade desk recently about like margin retention within the DSP, it really wasn't about like the good of the advertisers. About two economic models coming up against each other, right? One is a DSP which is trying to make as much money as possible, and the other is the principal media buying, which is obviously a new revenue stream for a very, very lucrative revenue stream for agencies, holdcos. So like it would stand to the reality is a lot of ad tech. There's a lot of ad tech bloat in the middle taking money, right? If you're losing like 40 or 50p in the pound, someone is getting done. Generally, probably the advertiser and the publisher, but someone's getting done on that, right? So I think Brian's point was the DSPs and SSPs becoming blurred into what if you listen to Rajiv from Pubmatic, his recent interview on marketecture, he barely talks about DSPs as if they don't exist. It's a weird like thing, like he doesn't even talk about them. They're like it's just Magnite as well. They have their own DSP or their own demand activation. Index have, in fairness, tried to stay close to the publisher, and Bedrock is that sort of happy in between. And I think that Bedrock is more about what Bedrock can do in terms of margin retention for ad networks and principal media buying solutions at agencies. We like that is going to be a huge thing. Don't get me wrong, it's the modularity and the agentic stuff that they're building for sure. But the reality is a lot of the adoption is going to be around, okay, how do I increase my take rate to 10, 15% for every dollar, every pound, every euro, every yuan, if you will. But they're not working in Japan or in China, obviously, because China is a closed-off market. That's another day. That's another podcast. So yeah, I look, margin is hugely is going to be huge important in the program as those lines blur. But the beautiful thing about this is that Index can still remain true to their publisher roots, and Bedrock can work within the Index container and sort of bring down the take rate. So this is going to be a big issue. I continue if you think about the way the market's going, margin is going to be a huge issue, right? And it's inevitable that margin compression will happen, and whoever can do that will win business. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's my take.
It's easy for State of Streaming to look at the news and say, hey, this is what we see is going on. But y'all had to be right about it. What led you to having the conviction about making the investments, especially at Bedrock, so early that it's materialized today?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, I appreciate it. As you say, it's one thing kind of looking at the news and going, oh, these are some interesting trends, which I think we're pretty good at, but it's also another thing to actually kind of forming and creating those trends and building these companies from scratch in many occasions, as we did with incubating Bedrock. Kieran, I feel like you've got an interesting view on this one.
Yeah, look, it's more a case of being able to cater for the ad tech middle, right? So if you think about, large agencies or FMCGs, they want scale, they want global scale. So like a Trade Desk or an Amazon DSP or DV360 does a great job in that. But then there are a lot of businesses that are ad network focused or built on curation, or even like the rising tide of like principal media buying, that sort of are at the bleeding edge, and they require something more custom, or they're looking for something a little bit more like a framework to build on top of. And Bedrock for us always represented that opportunity. And if you think about the three sort of companies that kind of led the way in terms of building a technology layer for great companies like the likes of MIQ and others to build on top of Web, Beeswax, and AppNexus, there really was a void there. There really was a vacuum, and there still is that 20% bleeding edge in the industry that requires something different. And I think that the thing about Bedrock was that the fact that they've built something that is what we call composable is that it can run anywhere, right? So the index relationship is a good instance of that. The ability to run their software within the container of a index's cloud infrastructure just shows you what is possible now, right? And that actually is hugely important because an instance like that drives down the margin to take rate. It also decreases the latency within the time from bid to actual winning the bid or actually being involved in the auction. I think it's like 2 milliseconds is actually like completely obliterated the time of the auction. That's hugely important in terms of like winning the bid and serving the ad. And I don't know if you guys have seen like something like Business Insider, which is a great website in many ways. If you scroll down, its ads are hanging all the time. That's latency issues, right? That's the hop from DSP to SSP to publisher. Now, what Bedrock does by living inside Index is able to win those auctions and serve those ads. So performance starts to increase, costs come down. And I think that's what's going to happen in programmatic. You're seeing it already, right? DSPs are kind of like shrinking the supply chain, trade desk with OpenPath. This SSP side, you've got Pomatic and Equitive and Magnite running sort of their own full platform piece. But the Bedrock innovation is huge, and we just think it's a leap forward, and it helps the ad tech middle. So that's sort of that was the thinking behind the investment.
I think there's an interesting strand here around the cloud computing angle and how ad tech is increasingly kind of getting distribution through those cloud partners. Our first investment out of our new fund is into a company called Audiences, which is a first party data kind of activation and modeling business. And the great insight that they had was, why are the incumbents like LiveRamp and others asking big brands to trust them with millions and millions and rows of very sensitive, very valuable data? There's obviously a privacy risk, there's a cybersecurity risk, and then ultimately there's a business model kind of challenge where those brands give up all that data and then effectively have to pay to get it out and actually activate it, almost a tax on using their own data. Whereas the guys at Audiences said, you know what, we can build an application that lives inside Azure or Snowflake or Databricks, whatever it might be, and literally do all of the same thing inside your existing cloud infrastructure. So there's no kind of almost usage-based fee for the brand, but equally for audiences themselves, they literally have no server costs. So it's a brilliant business model and a really interesting insight. So I think, for us, also that kind of more integration into the major cloud computing companies is a natural one and a smart one. And on that note, I was having a very interesting chat with one of our investors this week, who's a chief product officer at a very large media business. And he said something which really was fascinating. And he said, look, I get pitched by startups all the time. Clearly, as a very, very large media business, our AWS costs are infinitely more attractive than the AWS costs for those startups. And they might pitch me a 40 grand a month kind of engagement or license fee or whatever it might be. And he said, the thing is, I know that 10K, 20K, maybe even 30K of that 40 is basically paying Google or Amazon credits. And that's the poor use of my budget. I'd rather pay them 20, tell them to containerize their kind of software in my cloud, and then we're kind of both winning. That's really interesting.
That's a huge issue that never gets discussed in ad tech. The hidden ad cloud taxes, basically, that Google, Microsoft, and Amazon heap on the industry, and then they like Amazon, particularly Amazon and Google, leverage that then to kind of fuel their own sort of ad business. The thing that's interesting about the index news is that they're moving into a situation where they can leverage their own cloud infrastructure. to help other businesses win. I think Rich is right. It's really interesting. I mean, the other thing that's interesting about our portfolio is we are picks and shovels guys, right? Like that's what we are. Like we dig ditches. We don't dig the ditches. Sorry, we create the shovels for other people to dig the ditches. So, like the companies that are doing well in our portfolio are the ones that are interesting from a first-party data perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from a data perspective, from a compliance perspective. Really, that's where I think the cool stuff in ad tech is becoming bloody boring. It's not the sexy AI stuff or, the latest sort of format or, we're just the guys behind the guys behind the guys, basically. That's what we want to be.
Fair enough. Yeah, picks and shovels is a good way to do it. I was looking for a better analogy at some point, and I came up with a nice one, which is in the kind of motorsports world. You've got obviously like the driver and the teams, but then actually underneath that, you've got this very boring company no one's ever heard of that build the chassis and the tires, and they just want to get it into as many hands as possible. They don't necessarily care about being Ferrari or Lewis Hamilton, but you've never heard of the insert company name who I've already forgotten. But it's a similar sort of analogy in terms of, generally speaking, we're trying to back those companies that are that sort of, as you say, data infrastructure.
Are you sure we're not the window washers? No, or the really good looking lads that carry the scorecards around before the cars go out.
We all have a job to do.
Could be. I think I was mid-flow, Kieran. You cut me off, but I mean, look, this is a very, very small part of obviously this big cloud computing company's business. But it struck me as odd. I was like, they must realize that effectively there's a way of startups circumnavigating the kind of cloud fee in this instance by sort of saying, well, we'll just run our app or whatever in your cloud. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very small part of their overall business. But I wonder if there's any way that they can somehow block that in future, saying, hold on, actually, really, you should have a separate account, pay for these credits separately.
It's an interesting trend. It's something that we just wrote about recently, which was taking a look at how much of the streaming universe actually runs on AWS. And some estimates, but some fodder for the conversation. It looks like this year, 2026, AWS will make 3 times the margin on AI services versus traditional compute. 40% of the year-over-year growth coming from AI and machine learning versus the traditional media vertical. So it is an unspoken theme that we're certainly interested in covering, which is what's the influence of the relationship between the cloud that is the underpinning to so much of the ad tech that we're talking about. Yeah,
and obviously seeing similar things, I think, in the kind of the large language model versions, the kind of free or $20 a month version being obviously very, very different in sort of performance and quality to the more enterprise grade models, which obviously do chew through a hell of a lot of compute. I was about to start talking about another startup we were looking at, but that's probably a bit irrelevant to this particular topic. But yeah, certainly a interesting kind of angle there around the convergence of AI and cloud compute, and those big players obviously being in a pretty good spot.
There's another startup in your portfolio that I'm curious about. I think it kind of connects some of the dots here. Lumen, a recent announcement with Netflix in the UK, tying together the measurement piece of this. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Do you want to say this one, Karen?
Yeah, Lumen's is sort of another interesting business in the portfolio. It's a first-party data company that has built a attention business or attention signal on its own hardware. So it works with a huge-scale panel to build attention models for customers. So it works with DVIS, Amazon, Netflix. So Netflix are using it as a means to kind of measure the attention that it generates from advertising, which is becoming a very, very important metric in the space. So, again, it goes back to our narrative around, what will have some value, what will have some utility in the space. It's companies like this, and like Lumen is almost like an ingredients company. It builds these attention solutions for big scale customers. T-Vision got bought there recently by Viant. But that was, I believe they had cameras and with tracking sort of like TV viewing on terrestrial Or Lumen's technology can work across the CTV landscape. So it works with Prime, works with Netflix. So that's sort of the type of company, and it's sort of the leader in that space. I mean, it does have competitors like Adelaide and a few others, but Lumen has its own sort of unique first party data. That's where it generates all the value. Nobody can do what it can do, and where that's going is, you're getting a lot more omni-channel based stuff, which attention is like being applied to that. So like it's doing stuff with Meta and Google. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting space. We're like, it's one of our biggest position portfolio, and it's growing really, really fast.
Yeah, and I think some of the product kind of iterations and partnerships they're putting in place are very exciting as well. And moving just from attention as a sort of media buying currency to actually linking that to outcomes, be it brand lift or be it sales. So I'm sure there'll be some interesting announcements in the coming months around that. But it makes a lot of sense. It's like, not all attention is created equal. Just because something got 5 seconds of attention doesn't necessarily mean that it was equal to this other thing that got 5 seconds of attention. And so what they're really trying to build out is this, like, working backwards from whatever the KPI is, a sale or a certain incremental lift in brand awareness. How much attention do you actually need and on which channels? And we can therefore do that sort of predictive modeling in advance of you running the campaign to say, right, here's where you should be placing your media budgets to get to those kind of outcomes. So yeah, very interesting business. We remain very excited about that one. It's been one of the bigger bets over the last 3 or 4 years. And obviously they've been one of the real sort of long-term pioneers of the importance of attention in advertising. Kev, so I think it looked like you were about to jump in as well, though. Is there anything you wanted to add on Lumen or anything else before we wrap?
No monologue from me, mate. I'll keep us on time today.
Yeah, I think you got it in early actually on this one. That was good. Good opener.
I did, smashed it.
Yeah.
Kevin likes to do like a little soliloquy, Shakespearean.
Probably.
We gotta get the monologue open.
Yeah,
he's a monologue king.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Tim,
all my thoughts.
Really appreciate joining us today, Tim. And thank you for the recent coverage and your publication.
It was very kind of you, Tim. I have to say, it kind of took us a wee bit off guard because I think we were competing with the trade desk at the start. But like, I see your point. We are offering something that is unique to a very very I would say innovative segment of the ecosystem, right? So Bedrock definitely occupies that sort of gap. We're very excited by it. To be honest, they're doing great thing, and obviously they're in Miami this week getting schmoozed by all the various big retail media networks and media businesses and ad tech businesses. So that's quite exciting.
Quite exciting indeed.
Absolutely. For those of you listening in, thank you very much for tuning in again. Obviously, only 2 months or so away now to Cannes, so we look forward to seeing you a lot of you down there, and hopefully before that at some upcoming industry events. Watch the space for a FPC Spotlight event, which will hopefully be rolling out towards the end of May as well. Potentially bringing together a few of our interesting digital out-of-home assets for a discussion around that part of the market. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
The FPC Podcast, where the worlds of finance and ad tech collide. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The speakers may hold positions in the companies mentioned.